Professor Fasano, thank you very much for accepting to share your science with us. I do feel like talking to a star because you are one of the world's leading researcher in the field of celiac and autoimmune diseases, and a significant writer with the books on gluten freedom and the gut feelings. In our country, the conversation on gluten has just started, and our project Habits aims at generating conversations about healthy habits for the mind, body, and spirit. And we think that a healthy habit is to talk about science in such a way that people can relate to. So thank you once again for accepting to talk to us.
Thank you, Alexandra, for having me on your show. Appreciate it.
In your groundbreaking scientific work, there's always been a relation of you and the microbes ever since you start studying cholera. So my first question, obviously provocative, would be, you study the microbes because you want to understand them to eliminate them, or you study them because you understand that they also may help us as human species?
Actually, my journey has been exactly the same journey of the entire scientific community. When we, were focusing on how microbes interact with us, the understanding was all microbes were bad guys that needs to be eliminated. And that was the purpose of studying how they communicate with us to try to mitigate the impact on health the microbes had with us. And you mentioned cholera. That was one of the microorganisms that I was focused on. At that time, believe it or not, we were losing more lives with cholera than anything else that you can combine. 5 million kids every year were dying of cholera, of diarrheal diseases related to infections like cholera. Over the years, studying how they interact with us, I became to the appreciation that, like anything in life, even in the world of microbes, there are good guys and bad guys. And what I learned, and this was more in the recent past, that, the friendly microbes are by far many order of magnitude more frequent than the bad guys. But again, if you're good, you are underneath the radar screen. Nobody sees you because you're doing good things and people do not appreciate this. But if you do something bad, that comes up and you will see immediately. Like in our society, if somebody crazy go out there and shoots in a school, that goes in the news. But all the good deeds of people that day in and day out they do to help the society, that goes unrecognized. And that's the same story with the microbiome.
Yeah. Well, you recently witnessed an interview in which you're talking about the gluten-related diseases like an epidemic. And I was thinking about the entire spectrum of inflammatory diseases, and maybe it's exaggerated, but it's like the planet seems to be inflaming even more and more. The inflammatory diseases in general, the allergies, the asthma, the gut-related inflammatory chronic disease are exponentially growing in the world. You are calling gluten-related diseases like even an epidemic. So what is it happening? What I'm trying to find out is the human species doing something to actually change itself, or is it something else that we are doing badly to ourselves or to the environment? So what is it that is happening?
Yeah, this is partially related to the topic of understanding microbes and how they interact with us. These epidemics of chronic inflammatory diseases are mainly recorded in people that embrace a Western lifestyle. So in other words, people, they change their lifestyle radically so that it departed from what has been the plan of evolution of the human species. We were, until the recent past, we were, people that used to be born by vaginal delivery, to be fed real food, not using antibiotics because it did not exist. Again, this, led to a programming of the immune system to decide if, when, why, and how you unleash inflammation. That, by the way, when it's controlled, is a good thing because it defends us against, diseases. The problem is that we derail completely, particularly if we embrace Western lifestyle, from these plans, because we're born much more frequently by C-section, so we receive an engraftment of microbes that's very different from what Mother Nature decided to do. We feed junk to our kids, and therefore, of course, that has a huge impact. We use and abuse antibiotics, and all this will make the microbiome to program the immune system, put in the bar for inflammation much, much lower. And therefore, on a specific genetic background, this continued insult of inflammation will by default lead to the switch from genetic predisposition to clinical outcome. And that will explain why we have this surge of asthma, food allergies, autoimmunity, cancer, neurodegenerative diseases. So the bottom line, if you live in a Western lifestyle, situation, you don't die fast of infectious diseases anymore, as we used 2-3 generations ago. We die slowly and maybe more painfully of chronic inflammatory diseases. So this is a long way to answer your question. Like from the global warming, for many other things that affect our planet, we have been responsible as a human being on choices that we're not wise enough to avoid the situation. And again, I think we should learn a lesson to try to understand what we did wrong and try to play our genetic cards in a more effective way so that we can achieve our goal, not only to live longer, but healthier lives.
So therefore, going further on your point, what can we do to protect our microbiome? What can young parents do to protect our parents? Because it's not that people can go back, especially in the Western societies, as you mentioned, to getting dirty or having just a vaginal birth and so on. It's not possible to go back any longer. Therefore, What is it that people can do to protect this important concept, which is the microbiome, and also teach the kids?
That's right. This is the most frequent question that comes on the table all the time.
We thought we are original.
When people, they say, we should go back in the cave and live like him, and that's not
possible.
Not possible. It's like to pretend that we don't use cars anymore because they pollute. How you can even conceptualize that? Or don't use the cell phone because, can create issues. It's a matter of be wise to use what is appropriate to have as an advance of science and lifestyle in an appropriate way. Now, of all the elements that can affect the microbiome that I told you, you're born only once. You may be infected 2-3 times a year and use antibiotics, but you eat 3 times a day. So probably the most impactful of all has been this shift in nutrition. And when people, they say, what should I do to protect my microbiome from this imbalance that increase my risk to get sick? The answer is revisit history. So we took 2 million years to engineer this unbelievable, car, Ferrari, if you wish, that would require to have 98 octane gasoline in the tank to perform. And now we put water in the tank and we wonder why the car is not performing. Again, what we used to eat until the recent past, when we produce ourselves the food that we consume, so we were all, farmers, we ate a lot of fruits, a lot of vegetables, a lot of nuts, tubers. Why? They're there. There's an abundance. You just pick. Meat, of course, but you have to be a good hunter. Very rarely you will catch something. So, and of course, the meat is lean because you're catching animals that are escaping predators, including human beings. What has been fast forward now in the Western Hemisphere, the change? The switch completely in quantity and quality of this balance. We are omnivores, so I'm not saying that we have to eliminate stuff like meat or gluten in our diet, but we need to maintain the proportion that were before. If you allow me a parallel, imagine the microbiome as a farm in which you have different animals. You have horses, you have chickens, you have pigs, you have cows. They eat different things. And the evolution decided that we have to have 10,000 chickens to make eggs and 20 cows to make a little bit of milk for ourselves. Then you change completely the way that you feed your farm, because you don't give enough food to chicken anymore, and they die. And you don't make egg anymore. So the purpose and the goal is been defeated because we changed dramatically how we eventually take care of our microbiome, because they eat whatever we eat. And again, back to the beginning, this is a self-maintaining farm. So in other words, if they are bad animals, like the wolf that comes and eats chicken, it's the farmer that maintains that balance. But if you change the story and you put food out there for wolves, guess what? You're going to have a lot of bad guys, as I said before, that take over. And those are the ones that feed inflammation.
Yeah, very interesting. Well, we come to one topic which, as contentious it will be in my country, I'd like to ask you about it. Romania is one of the largest consumers of bread in Europe. In fact, we have something like 90 kilograms per capita, which is like really very close to Turkey, which is the #1 bread consumer in the world. So bread is key in the Romanian diet. It has been also under communism times. It's a staple, not only because it's cheap, but because it is part of our tradition, our cuisine, and our also, if you want, when in times of not having too much to eat. So to talk about less bread consumption in Romania is not something easy. In the same time, bread is not made in Romania any longer like my grandmother used to do with the dough overnight. So I guess, and if we agree that we've changed the way we eat, and that is a problem for our microbiome and going forward for the diseases, what would you say? And bread is a fundamental element to it. What would I be able to say? What would you be able to say to Romanian consumers knowing this particular information about bread consumption?
So I think that there's been an inappropriate demonization of gluten as the villain of the century. And again, sometimes paraphrasing our science, interpreting in the wrong way. So this is such a polarized discussion, because there are people on one hand that say, we have been evolving thanks also to agriculture. Without that, we will still jump from a tree or another. So, and a key staple of agriculture is wheat. So this is totally inappropriate what we're saying. On the other hand, there is the other stream of the camp that says wheat is poison for everybody. And if we not eliminate this for everybody, we will all die and the human species will be extinct. Of course, the truth is something in the middle. The reality of the story is that gluten per se is not harmful for the vast majority of people. It's only a very small group of people that they have a problem with gluten, namely people that have an autoimmune response to gluten, i.e. people with celiac disease, people that have an allergic response to gluten, people that in other words have wheat allergy, or they have gluten sensitivity or another immune response. And these are a very small percentage of people in the world. Let's say probably combined all together, we're talking about worst case scenario 10%, meaning that 90% of Romanians should eat gluten no problem. But what is the caveat here? Is that we went as a species again to 3 major revolutionary steps that changed completely the landscape of our nutrition. The first one was 10,000 years ago, advent of agriculture. So we were not doing gutters huntering anymore with the unknown if I got food, but we domesticated crops, including wheat, we domesticated animals, so it was predictable in terms of the food procurement. And because when we were gather hunters, we spent 90% of the time doing that. Now we free up our time to build, Colosseum, to be creative. So that was a good thing. The second step that was much more recent, urbanization. A lot of people left the countryside to go to cities. Now they are not producers anymore. They are consumers. The people that were left behind in the farms, now they need to produce not only for their own consumption. And again, at least I am old enough to remember that my grandparents, that's what they were doing with their farms. They were producing for themselves. The extra will exchange with other farmers for different products that they are producing. That was the economy at that time. You are sufficient. Now you have to step to the next level, produce more for the people that are in the city that they consume. And then the third kiss of death, where the problem really happened, has been the globalization. The producing force is in the hand of few multinational economic enterprise that produce a vast majority of these, commodities. Same happened with wheat. Now, if your grandparents have a wheat, field, they produce a relatively small amount of wheat, and if they lose 10% of the crop, it's not a good thing, but it's not a travesty. But when you go to this, huge multinational operation, they can't afford that. That will be a tremendous loss. What they do to compensate that? They use chemicals to protect, the crops. They eventually will, harvest at the wrong time and the wrong way. In other words, what you have now is still wheat, but organically speaking, is a very different thing. Now, the receiving end is the person that has to make the bread. Now, how do you make bread? You have the flour, wheat flour, you have the water, you have the salt, and you have the yeast. Very important. The yeast, if has the chance to work overnight, will dismantle this, peptides that seems to be harmful to us, all of us, in terms of induced inflammation. That by the time that you finish, your product, you have a piece of bread, most of them are gone. So if, on the other hand, as we do right now, do bread is a 2 hours process because it's accelerated by new way to do this, you don't give the time to disarm this, fragment of gluten that can be harmful. And what is the consequence? An increase of people that will have gluten-related disorders because, like for the microbiome get changes and increases the chance of inflammation, you have more people that switch from genetic predisposition to clinical outcome. But this is still a small percentage. But the vast majority of us, if we eat a slice of bread, 2 slices of bread, or 3 slices of bread, we don't have any problem. But if we want to eat an entire loaf of bread, as I used to do when I was kids, because I absolutely adore bread myself, not that you got sick, you would not feel well. That's the reality of the story. So you will pay a price.
If you don't feel well in Romania, most likely that you go to a doctor if you have bloatings or if you have some kind of chronic disease. One of the do good steps would be this advice, or any kind of nutritional disbalance. One advice would be stop eating bread. So do gluten free. And my question to you, so there are 2 questions here: is gluten free for everybody, and is gluten-free a fashion or a behavior that needs to be learned? And if yes, by who?
I believe that, once again, advising everybody with issues like bloating and so on and so forth to go gluten-free is not scientifically and clinically, justifiable. I mean, again, you may eventually give the suggestion to have a more balanced diet and reduce a little bit the amount of bread that you eat, but eliminating that completely, again, you go to an extreme and it's not justifiable. And yes, if you look at the world market of gluten-free products or people that embrace a gluten-free diet, the acceleration of this embracement of this diet is such that, you will, and you will sit and ask yourself, who are these people? The vast majority of these people who do this as a fashionable, trendy diet. Today is, gluten-free, tomorrow will be paleo, and then vegan, and so on and so forth. Besides being a professor of pediatrics, I'm a professor of nutrition. So I think that I know a little bit of what I'm saying here. I think that if you open your mouth, you look at your teeth in your mouth, that will tell you immediately you are an omnivore. You have to eat everything. The problem that we're facing with the wrong nutrition in the Western Hemisphere now, again, is not a matter of, junk that we eat and so on and so forth. It's a combination of quantity and quality. We eat way more than we need to, and the quality of what we eat is not even close to what was supposed to be. If we go back to the bread discussion, the quality of the bread is not what used to be. But that doesn't imply that I don't need to eat bread because otherwise I get sick. You have to be wise the way that you eat your bread and the quantity that you eat your bread. And eventually, if indeed any revolution starts from the ground, I will go to the extreme as a consumer and say, you know what, I don't like this bread anymore. I really want a bread that stays overnight with yeast, and I'm willing to pay a little bit more, but I want the bread that I used to be when I was a child, or that my mother gave to me, or my grandmother was used to make. What's going to happen? That bread done in the way that it's doing right now will stay on the shelves, and people that will understand the market and will adjust will start to sell. And over time, we will reacquire that kind of, lifestyle in terms of, nutrition, that, you will find more tuned with what we want. This is already happening with the organic, foods, with the kilometer zero food, the seasonal food. So in other words, there are people. Now, of course, every single time there's something like this, there's always this extreme, and people, they abuse, they sell you the organic water that makes no sense, of course. But, when I say, I buy eggs only if the chicken are cage-free, only if they are fed the proper stuff, I pay the eggs a little bit extra. This is happening already. I buy only the meat of cows that are grass-fed. They are able to eat the grass outside the stable. This is already happening. The same is going to happen for the bread if there is that kind of request from the ground. So, we are responsible for our own fate here, and we have the power to dictate, enough is enough if we want to.
There is another segment. Listening to you, I was thinking that there is another segment that took this opportunity of messaging and transformed it into big business, which is you hear very often the people that sell or promote supplements saying, because the wheat is not the same, because the soil is not the same, because the vegetables are not the same, you need to take supplements. That's also not okay, is it?
Absolutely not. Because you have a problem, and rather to fix the problem, you add another problem.
Exactly, you run another
problem. The Band-Aid is not a solution. It's just to say you need to accept that the bread is not the same like a while ago, and you need to take fiber supplement, or you have to take multivitamin supplement so that this will look more like the way they're supposed to be. This is not the way to handle it. Exactly. I mean, it's a counterintuitive way, because now you take the supplement, beside that, economically is much more expensive. They got the real bread. You have, additional, economic and health problem related to this. In Italy, I speak about Italy because I'm a little bit more knowledgeable about this, but I'm pretty sure in Romania must be something similar. They are particularly among the young generation. Excuse me, just a second. The young generation that are taking the matter in their hands. So, we used to use stones to crush wheat to make the bread. We used to use ancient grains to make the bread. These folks are taking the initiative to set up business in which, they produce bread, flour, using the old methodology, and they sell big time their products, and they are very, very popular. This is the beginning of a revolution, and I think that if it's not started already, you will see this happen in Romania rather quick.
Yeah. You see, I mean, there are again. I mean, it's extremely. I'm very happy you brought this up, because indeed there are the young generation is rediscovering methods of growing not only wheat but vegetables, and so we have very good tomatoes, and this is rediscovered. So like everything in life, there is the pendulum, the action and the reaction. Obviously, it's coming back. So I'm also, that is why at the Society of Healthy People, we are on the opinion that human must prevail, not medicine, not medication or disease first and human second. Human must be first, and then.
Alessandra, unfortunately, at least in the United States, we're in a society in which we don't want to work hard on goals. So, am I obese? I want a pill that make me lose weight.
Yeah, exactly. and this
is my blood pressure high? I want a pill to fix it, rather than change my diet. Doesn't work that way.
And maybe the crisis we are facing right now, whether it is an energy crisis or a climate crisis and so on, is also a kick to come back to some of more healthier attitudes versus our lives.
The American Indians, they had a tremendous respect of the land, because if you don't take care of your land, you, as an occupier of the land, will pay a dear price for it. There were so many words of wisdom in this. We don't take care of our planet, no matter how we'll be able to grow crops anymore, because the environment may be too hot, and therefore you will not be able to. So I think that if we respect the land where we live, if we respect each other, if we understand that we are on the same boat and we have to row in the same direction, we will not have insanity like, building walls to prevent people to come in our places. Wars you see at the doorsteps, that will not stop. 2022, truly, I was sure that I would never, ever experience what my mother experienced with World War II. And here we are. This is insane. It's absolutely insane. If somebody from Mars would look down the Earth, would say, are they crazy? Why did they do that? It's a
so you don't think it's too late? You don't think it's too late? You are an optimist. You have to be.
Oh, no. There is no point in our return in life, because the other thing is, Mother Nature taught us something extremely important. Who wins is the person, the individual, the microorganism, the plant that adapt fast to the changes. You may not be able to fight the reality of the story, but you need to adapt. The more you're ductile, the more you're adaptable, the more likely you will be able to survive. Question being, though, that this adaptability needs to be in the context of a political, social, religious, scientific wisdom to understand that, if we need oxygen to breathe, we will not have the time to adapt to give up with oxygen, because otherwise we will die.
Yeah, so we need to do it before.
That's right. So definitely it's not too late, but that would take, and again, the reason why I'm optimistic, because I don't trust my generation anymore. I really don't. But I trust the young generations that are pointing the fingers to us and say, you made these mistakes. You really ruined, our planet. You give us an inheritance something that it was very different that you got from your own parents and grandparents. I take over and make sure that this is not going to happen anymore. So I am optimistic, because I believe that the young generations are take the conscience of what has been done wrong, and then don't want to perpetuate the mistakes that have been made.
Wow. I have, I have three more things I wanted to ask, but I'm really very keen on this discussion. So I will see how we insert what I wanted to ask. But let's stay a little bit on this one. One of the things I noticed, and one of the reasons we wanted to talk to you, is obviously of your expertise and so on. But somehow in the way you talk and say, we realize that you are a thinker. So and that's exactly what you said right now. It's exactly in this direction. There is something we liked very much when you were saying, we now treat the disease and not the human. And if you look at the healers, you were saying, the healers in the past, they were looking at the individual and they were treating the individual, and they were not treating the disease. They were treating the individual, and therefore they were treating the community. So you were talking about healers, and that's quite radical in medicine. Can you say a little bit on this one?
So again, I am originally from Salerno, that is a little city southern Naples in the south of Italy, and it's famous for the Scuola Medica Salernitana. It's the first medical school in the Western Hemisphere. And at that time, it was the Harvard of the time. Okay, and mainly because crusaders that were in the Holy Land that were wounded would come to Salerno because there was a concentration of great doctors there. We're talking about, in 830, and we're talking about a very visionary school of medicine, which, the first faculty female, 860, was there. She was an expert on OBGYN. It took another 1,000 years to have another faculty member females after the Scuola Medica Salernitana. But the bottom line at that time, this was a mixture, of course, of evidence-based medicine, but mostly religions, astronomy, good sense, and was the mixture of the Chinese, the Jews, and the Greek philosophies. What was the goal there? Balance. Everything that goes off balance will bring disease. And if you go off balance, you need to go back to the center. And for example, there were no medication at that time. They used herbs, and they're based on the four elements. So the air, the fire, the wind, and the earth. And if you had an inflammation, meaning that the balance was toward the fire, then we use herbs on the other side, that was the water, to bring you back to balance. It was a little bit picturesque, but the sense was, again, focusing on the individual and his or her own situation. Then, the evidence moved from the individual to the disease, because we started to categorize in silos of diseases: autoimmune disease, cancer, allergic disease, and so on and so forth. And this was based on advancing anatomy, biology, microbiology, and so on and so forth. And we made the assumption that turns to be wrong, that all individuals equal. So if I have a colon cancer and you have a colon cancer, we have the same problem, and therefore we have to go with the same solution with the problem. But over and over again, we learn that even the most effective drug would never have 100% efficacy. So there's always somebody with that particular disease that will respond, and somebody does not. Meaning, we may go the same final destination, but how we got there can be very, very different. And that brought us to the concept of personalized medicine. There's nothing else to change the direction, say, you know what? We've been wrong to focus on disease. We definitely need to focus on the individual, because the individual is different in the biology, in the interaction with the microbiome, and so on and so forth, that epigenetically can lead to different outcome. And if that's the case, we need to stratify the population and personalize the intervention. And that's the reason why now, not Alessio, but an entire scientific and clinical community is thinking about personalized medicine. My interest goes way beyond that, goes to primary prevention, to try to understand what we've done wrong to fuel these epidemics of these inflammatory diseases, and try to learn a lesson and bring this back to a channel in which, rather than fix something that is much more expensive for the society and definitely for the individual, we prevent the problem to happen. This is not a medical issue anymore. It's a social issue.
Absolutely, it's a philosophical one, of course.
So
an ethical one, even.
It's ethical. There are, in other words, the policymakers, they need to make decision on the matter, because otherwise this would not be resolved. And that's the reason why this brings back the respect of the land, the respect of the individual as he or she is in his or her individuality, the respect for each other. Because, again, we are not immortal. We will be remembered for what we do in terms of our lives. And, there are people that are remembered for the wrong reasons. And again, I don't want to be politically incorrect with names, but trust me, there are people that are in book history that are remembered in the wrong way because they made the wrong decisions, and the people they are remembered in an unbelievable way because they really do goods. So tell me the way that you want to be remembered.
Well, one of the things that I know for sure you are going to the people are going to read about is your zonulin. So this protein is. I'm not a doctor. I have, I'm interested in the philosophy, in the human being, and in the humanity. I think this is what is missing more and more, and we're trying with WANA to restore this with our program, in a sense. So, if you would to explain zonulin to somebody like me, and the benefits of it, and why is this a discovery that you made in 2000 so important? What is it? What would you say?
So, the paradigm of why people get sick has been always the same. You have to have a predisposition to have a disease, and you have to be exposed to something that comes from the environment that is fueling the disease based on that genetic background. Now, these elements come from the environment, these offenders, these enemies, are in general kept at bay outside our body because we have barriers that will protect us against the invasion of these enemies. These are in general large molecules, let's say gluten, for example, for people with celiac disease, that under normal circumstances, they cannot come in our body and seen as an enemy by our immune system, whose function is dictated by genetics, of course. And when we try to understand how these two worlds interact, we always had difficulties to explain it because these barriers, the skin, the gastrointestinal tract, the lungs, are built to keep these folks outside. So when we went in the biology of these barriers, at the beginning, we thought that these are a sort of wall made by cells. They are cement with each other so that everything is kept out. And the only way to come in our body, you have to go through the cell, for example, for nutrients, so that we can absorb nutrients in our GI tract and therefore make energy and so on and so forth. But that would not explain how these big molecules like gluten can come in our body. That's not how they do that. Then, 30, 40 years ago, a Japanese group said, there is no cement in between these cells. There are doors. Most of the time they're closed. But once in a while, we want them open to let stuff come in because we need to understand what is our surrounding. But once we do that, then we want to close these doors right away. And over the years, we understood more and more of these gates, how they work, how they function. And they are not just in the GI tract. They are in the blood-brain barrier, for example. They are in the kidney and so on and so forth. One notion that was missing was who opens the door? What is the key? And that's what zonulin is. Zonulin opened these doors to allow, under very tightly controlled circumstances, stuff to come in so that we can understand our surrounding and build a element of what we call tolerance so that we don't fight food that come in our body, otherwise we would die. Or we learn about the enemies so we are prepared to fight against them. The problem arises when, under specific circumstances, this molecule is produced in large amount. That makes this door not to be open and close immediately, but stuck open for a long time. And that allows this flux of enemy coming in our body that on a specific genetic background can switch you from genetic predisposition to clinical outcome. Since we discovered this molecule in 2000, many people around the world link this molecule to a variety of conditions like infections, neurodegenerative diseases, neurodevelopmental diseases, autoimmunity, food allergy, cancer. They seem to all be unrelated, but they have a common denominator, inflammation. All these are inflammatory conditions. So this is a long way to answer. Zonulin is a molecule that, when well controlled, is extremely good for us to have. Like inflammation, when it's controlled, is defending us. But when you embrace a Western lifestyle, you induce changes, particularly in the microbiome, but also in other elements that will create the conditions to produce too much zonulin at the wrong time, at the wrong place. And therefore, this will start the march from genetic predisposition to clinical outcome.
So it's like St. Peter. Zonulin is like St.
Right.
Peter. He holds the key to letting the keys. Yeah. So then this leads me to it's clear that you have not stopped in discovering the key holder zonulin, but also you are continuing your research. Can you tell us at what you're working right now with your group of researchers in the field of autoimmune diseases?
That's right. So, again, one of the major limitations to study how you develop autoimmunity, particularly the contribution of the microbiome to this, is that we have to study conditions and make a lot of assumptions. So let's say I take 100 people with diabetes, 100 people with, they are controlled, they are healthy, and study a series of things, including the microbiome. I found the microbiome different, then I make the leap of faith conclusion that these people develop diabetes because it's different microbiome. But I can make the argument that it's the other way around, that because they have diabetes, their microbiome changes because they have to change the way they eat, or they are epiphenomenon. So to understand who is the chicken, who is the egg, if these changes precede the disease, the only way to do that is to do prospective study from birth, so that you have the scenario before, during, and after the onset. Of course, you can't do this kind of studies with disease like multiple sclerosis that occurs at 40s or 50s, because you have to follow these people for a long time. So we decided to focus our studies on two conditions that materialize rather quickly, both autoimmune diseases. One is celiac disease, in general, in the first 5 years of life. And the other one that now also considered autoimmune disease is autism, neuroinflammation that change behavior kids that will, make them to change their behavior. Both of them in rampage. They are increasing like crazy in the Western Hemisphere. So fulfill that criteria that was, I tell you, epidemics of this inflammation. So we have two studies ongoing in which we take babies at risk of this condition, either because they have somebody in the family with the condition, either celiac disease or autism. And we follow them over time. We hold their hands. We know everything about them. We know about their mother when they were pregnant, with these babies. We know the way they were born. We know the way they were fed. We know how many infections they had in the first years of life. We know how many antibiotics they took. We know if they have pets home. We know if they have siblings that go to daycare. And we collect information, a huge amount of information and a huge amount of samples, so that we have the capability to produce mathematical modeling to understand beforehand who is taking the wrong path and switching that, genetic predisposition to clinical outcome. We have some data now already, at least for celiac disease, suggesting that the shift of the microbiome that predict with this mathematical modeling using artificial intelligence with a great level of accuracy. Now we are 80%, but I'm convinced that we can go even higher. Who, with that particular microbiome composition, will develop celiac disease down the road? This is amazing, because now we have a target that we can, of course, we can't, change our genes, but we can change the trajectory, how they are used by manipulating the microbiome, if we know beforehand what are the changes that will eventually increase their risk to develop the disease. So that's where we're focusing on, because as I told you, prevention is cheaper than treatment.
Absolutely. Fantastic. So we will definitely keep an eye, and you've explained it very logically and very clear to us. We are coming to the end of our discussion, very rewarding from my point of view, at least. And I'd like to ask you a final question. You've always described, you use this word when you talk about your discoveries, serendipity. This is very unusual to describe scientific medical discoveries with this word. Why is that?
Because the vast majority of discoveries are serendipitous, and it's a word that I don't know how to translate in any other language, because it's this unforeseeable events and the lineup of stars that you don't predict. Again, the discovered zoning, for example, is an act of serendipity for sure, because I was trying to develop a vaccine for cholera and I end up failing, by the way, and I end up to discover this molecule. Good scientists, is somebody is well trained, they have an overall hypothesis and is on point A and wants to go to point B, and from point B to point C, and so on and so forth. And you design the experiments to try to bring your knowledge from point A to point B. And 9 out of 10 times, what you predict is wrong. So rather than go to point A to point B, you would go from point A to point Z. There is a dead end. You go nowhere from there. But very few times, that dead end, if you're not discouraged and you listen to nature and not trying to force to go to point B because that's what I believe is the right place to go, brings to a shift of paradigm, opening completely a new science of paradigm. I can go to the list of the last Nobel Prize in medicine, and they all made their discovery brought the Nobel Prize by serendipitous actions. They didn't intend to do that. It just happened because, again, they took this wrong turn and that to be a shift of paradigm.
So rarely, allowing themselves to be surprised.
Exactly. I mean, rarely, people they
like in life, no, Professor?
Absolutely. Because again, we have our preconcept, and therefore we build our hypothesis on something that may not have any, repercussion in reality of the way things they go. So anyhow, this is the reason why I believe that life in general, but definitely science, is all an act of serendipity.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you very, very much for. It was a lovely for me. It was a very refreshing, and I'm so encouraged by the optimism that you. I mean, it's in your job description. You cannot be a researcher and a doctor if you're not optimist, for sure. I mean, but in these times of a lot of inflammation, I think it's very, very refreshing to see, and it's very clear. I'm sure our viewers will appreciate the logic of your arguments and the simplicity of your explanations, which is what the reason precisely why we wanted to talk to you. And thank you very much once again.
Thank you for having me again, Alessandro.
Vă mulțumim că ne-ați urmărit, sperăm că v-a fost de folos și vă invităm în comunitatea noastră a Societății Omului Sănătos.